It's a pleasure and an honor to be back here. It's bringing back such great memories. It seems like yesterday. So I was driving up the 401 just this morning or this afternoon, and the memories started flooding back, right, to me. And it's just, from late night things that we got up to, no good, to some of the more academic things. They really are flooding back, and it's really cool to be back here, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here. And it does, funny to say this, but it does seem like yesterday when it was September the 3rd, 1991, and I was dropped off here and had really big hopes and big dreams and even bigger hair. You see, in the early 90s, it was cool for dudes to have big hair, or so I told myself anyways. But it's like yesterday where I quickly unpacked my bags, said goodbye to my family, and said hello to a bunch of new friends. And then I made my way to Thompson Arena, where the Bare Naked Ladies were kicking off orientation week. So it was a pretty cool start to my career. And that was like over 20 years ago. Yes, that was back in the days when the Leafs did play hockey past March. And it's hard to believe for many of you, but the internet didn't really exist, right? Can you imagine your life with no Snapchat, no Twitter, no Vine, no Facebook, no Google, YouTube, right? Just go back there with me to those ages. I struggle with that myself. No mobile phones, unless you're a drug dealer or an investment banker. And even it wasn't even that mobile. Like, there were bricks. Right? There's like this mobile brick you'd hold up to your head and you'd look really stupid. But email was for like people who did computer science, another part of campus. And we actually went to Weldon. It's good to see it's still called Weldon, to actually look up actual information, often using something called a microfiche. You guys know what those things are? Anyways, I digress. So you guys have all grown up with this. You've grown up with the internet, and most of you were probably born in around the time when we witnessed an acceleration of pretty much everything, and that's really cool. And keeping up with this is really exciting. It's invigorating. But I sometimes find it's overwhelming. So I want to keep things pretty straightforward tonight. So I have 2 rules and 4 stories. It's a 2-4. The 2 rules are, number 1 is you have to learn one thing, right? And the second rule is you have to do one thing, okay? I like acronyms to keep things simple and remember. So learn one thing is LOT, do one thing is DOT, okay? Can you guys remember that? LOT and DOT. All right? So tonight I'm really going to share 4 stories about my life and how I got to where you guys were sitting to where I'm standing right now. And the first is a story about stepping out of your comfort zone. One of my earliest memories of London was actually arriving here in a laughing gas-induced haze in an ambulance. I had broken my arm really badly playing hockey. And I grew up just down the street in a little town called Goderich, about an hour and a half down the road. Anyone heard of Goderich? All right, we're representing. I'd be surprised if you'd been there, and even more surprised if you've kind of driven through. But it's a great place, and I highly recommend it. It's really beautiful. But I grew up there, and when you grow up in a small town, London's the big city. So London's the place where you come for big city things, like broken arms and shopping sprees. Now, growing up in a small town was really pretty cool, like pretty unadventurous, but generally fun. I grew up in the country, across the street from the local airport. I used to ride the bus to school every day. I did well in school without really trying. I played every sport imaginable, and I had a good group of friends. After a couple of years after that fateful trip to London, my parents, in their infinite wisdom, decided to send me to a boarding school in Toronto. So let's keep track at home here. If I'm thinking at that time, London's a big city, you can probably imagine what I felt about Toronto. It literally felt like another planet. Right? And boarding school, that's where you sent troubled kids to be reformed, right? That was what was going through my brain. So it would be safe to say that I was a little out of my comfort zone in those last couple years of high school. And I can still remember those painful first few months. Let me tell you, it wasn't your garden variety homesickness. Okay, so you enter into a boarding house from this little town called Goderich to a world which is like a virtual, a veritable United Nations. There's kids from all over Canada, all over the world, countries I'd never heard of or barely seen on a map. And suddenly, mediocrity wasn't cool, right? Excellence was. I remember people snickering at me in my first French class because I couldn't read Albert Camus' L'Étranger. And for the record, I read the English translation later, and I still have no idea what it was about. I also remember when my English teacher asked us to take our journals out and share our reflections on Homer. I was like, oh, I got this one. I'm going to write about Homer Simpson. By my estimation, I was at least 2 years behind in every subject, maybe with the exception of phys ed. And it really sucked to go from the top of my class to the bottom of my class. And it was really, really overwhelming and somewhat distraught. I was distraught and confused. My brother's here, and we grew up in this really competitive household. And I knew one thing. I played a lot of sports, and I hated to lose. I hated to lose at anything. So losing at school and being so humiliated was actually motivating for me. So stepping out of my comfort zone made me learn how to learn really quickly. Now, and the good news was by the end of the year, I'd mostly caught up. I'd turned that failure and humiliation into this great motivation to get better each and every day, just a little bit. So that was really cool. I also rediscovered my love of hockey. So after I broke my arm, I took a break from hockey for a bit, but I made the varsity team despite having been away for a while. And that was pretty cool. That made me somewhat cool at the school that was really obsessed with hockey. But I also learned how to get the easy stuff right. And to me, the easy stuff is out hustling everyone. So whether it was in the classroom, whether it was on the field or in the arena or chasing girls at the neighboring school, I hustled. I outworked people. And at the end of that year, I was awarded something called the Lauren Mackenzie Medal for the best effort. And to this day, I don't think I've won anything I'm more proud of because it was really about giving the best I could in a really tough situation. So that was pretty cool, but it really, more importantly than all that, I think it gave me the confidence to succeed when I was really, really outside of my comfort zone. And that served me really, really well in life. And it certainly set me up well for the next stage and the next story of my life, which was coming to Western. And that my story about Western in general is about gaining perspective. So the second story is about gaining perspective. My time at Western and Huron really pushed me even further outside my comfort zone and opened my eyes even wider to the diversity of this wonderful world we live in. And I gained perspective in a bunch of different ways, sometimes in the classroom, but especially outside the classroom. So like many of you, I was blessed with some great professors who really challenged me and really educated me about just awesome things, taught me how to communicate, taught me how to attack problems and so on. For context, I was originally drawn to Western to attend the business school. And I ultimately decided to come here, in fact, to attend the business school, largely to please my parents, just to be really clear. I dutifully filled out all the forms, took all the prerequisite courses, applied to and gained admission to the business school. But then I decided something, I'm pretty happy right where I am, studying economics at Huron. And I enjoyed my classes, as I said. I enjoyed my classmates. I enjoyed my topics. And also the thought of waking up for 8 o'clock classes every day, to be alongside with, no offense to the HBAers in the audience, to be people who took themselves a little too seriously at the time, it just wasn't that appealing to me. So I decided to stick with my passion around economics and some politics. I became particularly fascinated with China. This is during the era of the communist rule and the closed economic system, their people, the political systems, their economy, a fascination that stays with me to this day. But it was really important. That was an important fork in the road for me because to me, that's when I stopped living someone else's dreams for me and I started living my own, and that was really important. Outside the classroom, I had a job at a place called Marymount Children's Center, which is located, I'm not sure the direction, that way, over behind King's College. And it's a family support and crisis center. and it was just really, really quite cool to have a job there. So I worked there during the school year, and then for the first half of the summers, I would plant trees, and then the last half, I would run their summer day camp. And gaining exposure to children and families in crisis instilled, of course, a very deep sense of appreciation for the many blessings in my life to that point. It also taught me the value of role models. So I believe I was hired there because I was a role model, a male role model. They didn't really do much diligence, apparently, but I was a role model for the kids, and I could see the positive impact that having a good role model has. And more generally about community service, I learned the value of it, both from a selfish perspective because it felt great, but also in terms of the importance of doing it for the betterment of our communities and for our society overall. The Greek system in the world today is much maligned, and in many cases, in most cases, I would argue, rightfully so. But I had a wonderful experience here at Western in my fraternity. I cherish the many memories. I cherish the many friendships to this day. As president of my fraternity, I learned a lot of lessons about leadership. It's deeply rewarding, but rarely easy. Rarely easy. I didn't understand it then, but I think I do now, that leadership is not about the leader. It's about the team and each person, each member of the team. And I love a quote by Harry Truman. He said, it's amazing what you can accomplish when no one cares who gets credit. And I believe that's so true. I believe that Canadians actually get this. And part of the reason why Canadians succeed on the global scale in big, big leadership roles is because they understand this. They understand that collaboration and teamwork is essential and paramount for everything that happens. Perhaps I gained the most perspective through the great close friendships I have with my friends that were formed, as I said earlier, in study groups and late-night shenanigans in the dorm, intramural sports, late night Sammy Souvlaki runs after a good night at Seeps. It still exists, I hope. A few. Maybe we can go grab a souvlaki later, Aaron. And again, I remain lifelong friends with many of the folks I met here. So I want you to look around. Look around you right now. The friends and the classmates that you have right now. They're forming the early foundation of your network. And a great friend of mine and a former colleague who's now the Chief Technology Officer of the United States, her name is Megan Smith. She always used to tell me, it's not the journey, Chris, it's the company you keep. And it's so true, because the people in your life shape your happiness and ultimately shape your success. I know I'm at my best when I'm surrounded by smart, dynamic, hardworking people who really challenge me every day. In graduate school, I picked classes almost solely because of the professor or the classmates. Right? So, and interestingly, I learned more about business strategy in my accounting class, because I had a great accounting professor, than I did in my strategy classes. I learned much more about inspiring people from an operations professor than I did from my organizational behavior professor. And I use this rule throughout my career. I use it each and every time I'm trying to decide whether I should take a different job opportunity. I use it each and every time to understand which nonprofits I should get involved with, which boards to sit on, even which sports I want my kids to play. It's a really important part of, I think, of my success to know that people drive everything for me. Maybe more comically, I have adopted something I call a no donkeys rule in life. I don't want any donkeys in my life. On a tactical or maybe helpful level, most opportunities in your life will come through the people that you know. So how do you nurture your network? Well, I have some ideas for you. Each and every day, you should be in touch with at least 3 people in your network, if not more. And each time you should strive to create value in those interactions by being creative, by being relevant, and being timely. And for example, I'm a shamelessly proud Canadian, as my Twitter and other profiles might indicate. And I'm always encouraging people to visit this country, whether they've been here before or whether they've not. So what I do is I have these little value payloads called itineraries and agendas for every city in the country. And if I don't have one, I make one up. So I'm always encouraging people to explore new things about our wonderful country. I frequently send articles about a business problem I know a friend or an entrepreneur is wrestling with. And then the mantra I have is actually summarized by a quote from Albert Einstein. He says, strive not to be successful, strive to be of value. And I think that's really helpful when you think about nurturing your networks, because it gets harder when you're not integrated with the same people each and every day. And having a strong network is absolutely essential to success in a global world, because I believe it's essential to making your own luck. A good friend of mine, Scott Bonham, calls this strategic serendipity. And this is the third story. I want to talk about strategic serendipity. How many people have you heard talk about or think about lucky breaks in your career, right? Lucky breaks? Yeah. We all hear it. I just don't buy it, right? I believe in what Scott calls strategic serendipity, which is really like a fancy way of saying you make your own luck. You know, Napoleon once said, ability is of little account without opportunity. Show me the lucky generals. So how have I created luck in my career? You know, mostly by showing up. I believe that 80% of success in life or in your career is just showing up. You know, those who show up, those who express interest and curiosity, are those who are rewarded, not those who sit around waiting to be asked. And what about following your passion? I know a lot of people have probably heard this one. I sure heard it growing up. Follow your passion and everything else will follow, right? You guys heard that, right? Lots of speeches probably encourage you to do that. And, you know, again, I don't buy that because I just don't think it's that practical. Right? If I go back in time, like 20 years when I was sitting where you guys are sitting, like I was passionate about a few things, of course. We all have passions. Like I was passionate about my friends and my family, the Toronto Maple Leafs, you know, drinking beer, hanging out with my friends, China, and traveling. Like, so when people would say like, hey, just pursue your passions, I'm like, I'm just kind of confused right now. So what did I do? So after Western, I started my career in management consulting, and I did that because it seemed to be like the thing to do with a lot of smart people who were motivated. That's what they were doing, so I decided to do that. And after 3 years of traveling all over the place and working extremely long hours, I felt burnt out, a little stuck, so of course I applied to business school. And while I was waiting to hear back from business school, I was assigned to a project in San Francisco. And that changed my life. I fell in love with San Francisco almost the instant that the plane touched ground. I mean, what's not to like about San Francisco, right? I mean, of course, there's the weather, there's great sports teams. You can go golfing, skiing, drink wine, and hang out on the beach all in the same week. But above all those things that you can see, it's actually the intoxicating sense that anything's possible that really, really drew me to the area. You know, this notion that a small, thoughtful, motivated group of people can change the world. Soon after, I met and fell in love with the woman who is now my wife, so that had something to do with it as well. And this is back in 1998, right around the time when the internet boom was just getting underway, and two guys named Larry and Sergey started this company called Google in a garage. Now, I drank the Kool-Aid hard, right? This is like, I was going to go all in on the internet. I was like, the biggest fanboy for the internet. And I actually postponed business school and decided to pursue both my relationship with my now wife, which worked out well, but also to learn more about this thing called the internet. And I eventually, and thankfully did eventually head to graduate school. And after a couple more years of consulting, I was invited to interview at this small little company called Google by an old boss of mine in consulting. That was the good news. The bad news was I got rejected. I stayed in touch. I was persistent, pleasantly persistent, and continued to hone my craft. Right, my craft at the time was this emerging thing called the internet, in the digital marketing world, and e-commerce was just again starting to emerge into something real. And fortunately, I was asked back. I'd stayed in touch, and I was eventually offered my dream job at Google, and that was about 10 years ago. So 2 years into my career at Google, things were going well. Strategic serendipity struck. My boss, it's kind of like the quarterback who gets injured and the backup to the backup gets put in. That kind of happened to me at work. My boss was going on a maternity leave. They looked around. They said, he seems to know what he's doing. They handed me the keys. And I guess I didn't screw things up too bad because she came back 6 months later and I was offered another job and then another. And eventually, They said, hey, he seems to know what he's doing, and he's Canadian, and we got some problems up in Canada. Go fix Canada. So that's how I got my job running Canada for Google. And truly, that was like, I'll look back, and I hope I'm wrong on this, but leading Google in the best country in the world was the highlight of my career. It's just been it was amazing run. So if I reflect back on these experiences, this notion, I didn't like consciously follow my passion. Instead, I think I figured out how to add value in the world, right? And then I constantly crafted my career around this notion where I could add value, and it became a bit of a self-perpetuating thing. And so I developed my capacity around this notion of the internet. And I believe that you greatly increase your odds of strategic serendipity, by being good at, like really, really good at one thing. And by that I mean you're the one thing that you're better at than anyone else on your team, in your company, in your industry, or even in the world. Ironically, some of the best, actually the best career advice that I've ever come across is from a comedian named Steve Martin. Kind of funny, huh? His advice: be so good they can't ignore you. Be so good they can't ignore you. As I said, for me, that's understanding the internet, understanding that software is eating the world and disrupting pretty much every industry imaginable. And building great teams to take advantage of this notion of the internet, to make the web work for them, to make the web work for people in general and for businesses big and small. Over time, you should figure out what you want that to be. You have a clear sense of what you want that to be, the skill sets you want to develop, and the personal brand that you want to cultivate for yourself. So I mentioned my brother's here with my nephew, Wilson, and Wilson's making an important decision about high school. I think he's also trying to make an important decision about university at the same time. So he's going to be in the graduating class of 2023, I think I calculated. Right, Will? I think he could use a little encouragement from you guys. But my brother Jason likes to call this, you Inc. What do you want you to represent? What do you want your brand to be? I think that's great advice. If I generalize, I think that great careers live at the intersection of three things. The first is your interest and curiosity for the world. The second is this notion that I've been discussing. What are you good at? What are you uniquely good at? And the third is what the world values. Right? Strategic serendipity lives at the intersection of those three big circles. My last story is about shooting for the moon. So I told you about my run in Canada. It was the best of my career. But after that run, I was asked to go to headquarters and join Google X, which is Google's moonshot factory. So while it was sad to say goodbye to Canada at the time and the wonderful team that had grown to do amazing things, the chance to work alongside a group of inventors, makers, and engineers that are deeply committed to changing the world, making the world like this radically better place, was just too great an opportunity to pass up. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For context, our moonshot factory is inspired by JFK's famous speech about putting a man on the moon and returning him safely within the decade, back in the 60s. And we talk about moonshots very specifically. A moonshot is defined by three characteristics. It has to be an enormously big problem, a problem that impacts millions, if not billions, of people in the world. Secondly, you have to come up with a radical solution to that problem. A problem that or solution rather, when you articulate it, you get laughed at because it sounds like science fiction. And the third element of this is there has to be a breakthrough technology. So for us, technology has to be a part of it that makes you believe that that radical solution just might be possible in the next 5 to 10 years. So you've probably heard of some of these. The self-driving car. So what's a self-driving car? Well, it's our attempt to help eliminate some of the 1.2 million deaths by car accidents that happen in the world each year, or the 6 billion minutes of wasted time in traffic each and every day. Things like Google Glass, things like Project Loon. So for every one person in the world that has access to the internet, 2 don't. So Project Loon is a project that is a bunch of balloon-powered internet that really provides internet access to people that don't have it, either because they can't afford it or because it's in remote areas. Or something like a smart contact lens. So we've created this thing that allows us to measure glucose in tears, which radically changes the way in which diabetics measure and ultimately manage their disease. So I think you get the drift. You've probably heard of many of these things. And one way I like to think of this is it's the pursuit of 10x, this totally transformational stuff, not the pursuit of incremental 10%. So my lesson early on at Google is to think really big. This is the type of people that I'm surrounded by, and it might sound crazy, and it actually is. Working with people like Astro Teller and Sergey Brin and Megan Smith, these are like the leading lights in their fields, and are absolutely. I'm very blessed to have the privilege of working with them. But really, I'll articulate why making moonshots makes sense. The first is to reach their scale. They demand collaboration. Right? You just can't reach them without multiple groups pulling together to accomplish them. And related to that, they focus the mind and unleash just incredible amount of creativity. Thirdly, they galvanize people. If you think about when JFK talked about putting a man on the moon, a whole nation, if not a whole world, was galvanized behind that mission. So they galvanize people, they galvanize organizations, they galvanize around a common mission because it's so big and it's so awesome. And lastly, and I'd argue most importantly, they attract the best people. The best people in the world don't want to tinker around the edges. They want to work on big problems. And this, all this stuff sounds great in theory, right? And the truth behind all this is it takes a ton of courage. It takes a ton of courage to say out loud, I'm going to shoot for something impossibly big. You know why? Because if you're going to shoot for something impossibly big, guess what's going to happen? You're going to fail a lot along the way, almost by definition. If you're not, you didn't shoot for the moon. You didn't shoot high enough. And fear of failure, of course, is natural. We all are afraid to fail. Canadians perhaps have more than their fair share of this fear of failure. As a nation, I believe we've tended to be a little too modest in our ambitions, and I believe we frankly need to get over it if we're going to succeed on a global scale. Now, Silicon Valley, where I currently live, is far from perfect. I'd be the first to say that, but when it comes to fear of failure, it's just not something people worry about in the Valley. Their honest failure is viewed almost like a Boy Scout badge, right? To succeed, to earn it, you have to have at least failed once, right? Before you're really kind of taken seriously. It's true. It's strange, but true. So the lessons in this chapter, this story to me, is really have an inspiring mission for what you're doing, what you're a part of, because it just makes things better. It makes things more exciting. The second part is build a team of people who are truly passionate, truly motivated to dream these crazy big dreams, to tackle impossible problems, and really aren't afraid to fail. And when they do fail, they dust themselves off and get back on the mission. And lastly, again, to think big, to think 10x, not 10%. And I know it's easy for me because I work in technology to say this stuff, but you don't have to work on technology moonshots to think big and to think 10x. In fact, I think very strongly and believe very strongly that the people and the companies that are going to succeed in the future are those that think 10x. They're going to have the biggest impact in the world. They're going to have the biggest impact in their lives. The pace of change I was alluding to earlier just absolutely doesn't lend itself to incrementalism. So I would encourage you to apply this to your lives as you step out of university into your careers and in your own lives. And it's my hope that I've inspired you in some way to pursue your own personal moonshot. that you've learned one thing, and most importantly, that you do one thing to propel you towards your own personal moonshot. Thank you so much.